The Blackhawks have a second line center problem, and today I want to discuss four players that I think are realistic options for the Blackhawks to acquire either this season or potentially this upcoming offseason that will help solve this Blackhawks second line center issue. Now, this was purposely left to kind of be a possible problem for the Blackhawks. Kyle Davidson did not address the second line center position. Now, this was due to he wanted a guy like potentially Frank Nazar, who played well in the couple of games he got last year after signing with the University of Michigan to take that spot with a good training camp. That unfortunately did not happen. Philip Kershaw was another option as well, but he just really hasn't been too solid offensively this year to maintain that second line center position. It has now been bounced around the lineup paired with Connor Bedard on Connor Bedard's wing just because they had a lot of chemistry. And then Lucas Reichel has found a fit at center, but it's been in the fourth line between Maroon and Craig Smith, which is not what many people would expect, but they're producing offensively, so you don't really want to change up that line either. And that overall leaves the second line center spot, which is currently being held by Nick Foligno. Nick Foligno, he's been solid at the faceoff dot, but obviously you want someone more offensively minded and can play a little better offensively and defensively, especially when you're in between two players like Tyler Bertuzzi and Taylor Hall. So today, as mentioned, I wanted to discuss four options I think the Blackhawks can acquire. Most of these I think can happen this season, but one option that I'll get into in a little bit, although initially I thought it would be possible for him to get traded this season, it looks more realistic that if you were to get moved, it would be this upcoming offseason. So without further ado, let's get into the first option. The first option that I'd like to discuss is for Trevor Zegras at the Anaheim Ducks. Trevor Zegras, in my mind, would be a great fit as a second line center in the sense that he's very offensively minded, very offensively skilled. He's currently 23 years old, so he does fit the Blackhawks rebuilding timeline. He's going to grow with the team, etc. I think it's also a really nice thing, too, that he has one more year left on his contract at just under $6 million. And after that contract is up, he will be an RFA, so the Blackhawks have ownership of his rights, I guess you could put it, for the foreseeable future until he's 25. So they have control over him for at least a couple more years, even when his contract expires. And again, he's very offensively minded. He'd fit really well in that second line center position behind Connor Bedard. Personally, I think that it wouldn't take too much, especially not as much as I think many Ducks fans would want for a Trevor Zegras trade. I think it's only going to take the Blackhawks pick that they got from Toronto in their 2025 first round pick, Nolan Allen, who's a solid young defenseman, and a 2026 second round pick as well. I know Ducks fans aren't going to really like that trade package. I know that they want a lot more. They want a king's ransom. But right now, he just hasn't played well to warrant such an exorbitant asking price that the Ducks rightfully so have. And with Zegras falling out of line, it feels with the Ducks and so many young forwards that they have, they could see him as expendable and potentially look to move him for some help either on the back end or just to recuperate some more draft picks to make other spots to beef up the rest of their lineup. Now, some of the drawbacks with a guy like Trevor Zegras is he's not very defensively minded, but that's kind of it's a trade-off because he's very good offensively. He has the best puck skills in the league, or at least his top five. So there is that opportunity cost where you lose a little bit on defense. And his faceoff percentage is only 41% in his career, which is certainly concerning when you consider Connor Bedard's also been struggling at the dot to start his career. Now, I'm sure Connor Bedard is going to really improve his faceoffs. He seems very, very motivated to, but I don't think it's best for the Blackhawks' top two centers to have very low faceoff percentages because that means that you're putting a lot of stress on a guy like Jason Dickinson as the third line center to take a lot of those defensive zone draws. So I think that this would be a great option for the Blackhawks just because of the offense, and he's so offensively skilled. It'd be a great addition, but there's also the cons that come with it as he's not as defensively minded and he has a pretty low face-off percentage as a whole. So that's one option, and then we'll get into the next option right now. Option number two is a player that, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think he's going to be traded in season, and I'll get into that shortly, but potentially could be acquired this potential offseason if he doesn't reach a contract extension with his team and says, I'm not going to extend with you. And that's forward Martin Necas of the Carolina Hurricanes. Necas was in a bunch of trade rumors this past offseason, was potentially linked to a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets, almost got traded there potentially, but things fell through, didn't happen. And he's kind of had a falling out with the Hurricanes, could have, again, taken just a one-year deal and just walked himself to free agency, but instead decided to sign 2 years at just over $6.5 million. Necas, similar to Zegras, very offensively minded, has had several years above 50 points, above 60 points. And again, I think he'd be a great addition behind Connor Bedard. He is very offensively minded. again, some of his drawbacks are similar to Zegras. He's not the most defensively minded player. He profiles a bit more on the wing than he does as a center. Again, that faceoff percentage is something that I look at a lot when I'm thinking about who I'd like as the Blackhawks second line center. But the big thing that right now I don't see the Hurricanes trading him, the main reason why is because he has 21 points in 12 games at this moment of recording this video, and the Hurricanes are a Stanley Cup contender. There's no reason for them to trade Martin Necas, especially when they have one more year left. And even if he was on an expiring contract this year, it makes no sense to trade your best player so far this year when you're trying to win a Stanley Cup. Now, possibly this offseason, the Blackhawks could look to acquire him. I think it might cost them their first round pick this upcoming year. Phil Kurashev, who's a young forward, could be a solid middle six forward for the Hurricanes. And then Connor Murphy would be a great addition to shore up their bottom six, especially at 50% retained. I think this deal works for both sides, especially the Blackhawks find themselves in the 5 to 10 range in the first round. You might look to say, let's get some more immediate help and get a guy who, once again, will fit the rebuild, 25 years old. And then this would also have to come under the pretext of he's going to be signing an extension with the Blackhawks. So, again, similar to Zegras, very offensively minded, but again, the drawbacks are he profiles more as a wing, but he's also said he wants to be a center in the future. So we'll see what happens, but Necas is another option that I wanted to discuss just because he's been mentioned in trade talks in the past. And if he says this offseason he doesn't want to extend with the Hurricanes, he could potentially get moved, and the Blackhawks would be a team that I think would be a great fit for him. Option number 3 is a guy who doesn't exactly meet the Blackhawks rebuild timeline, as he's definitely an older player, but I think he could still be a solid addition this season or potentially signing him this upcoming free agency during the offseason, and that's for Brock Nelson of the New York Islanders. Brock Nelson is a solid two-way center. He is a guy who's put back-to-back seasons of around 70 points and has consistently been a 50-point player. And again, as mentioned, these past 2 years has taken his offense to another step, defying age at 33 years old, and is off to a decent start this year, on pace for about 40, 50 points, kind of similar to what he's normally been doing throughout his career. And again, he plays well defensively. He's probably the best defensive minded player that I'm going to be discussing these 4 options. And if the Blackhawks want to get an addition this season, he could potentially be a trade deadline candidate, as the Islanders aren't the best team this year. They aren't the worst team in the NHL. And depending on how things go in the next couple of months, with him being having an expiring contract, he might get moved by the Islanders. Now, again, the positive two-way game provides a lot of offense. Again, checks off both boxes in my mind for who you'd want as a second line center. The cons, Lou Lamoriello really loves Brock Nelson. He's one of his favorite players. He's been very outwardly spoken about how much he likes Brock Nelson. So it might be hard for the Blackhawks to pry him away from the Islanders, at least during the season. And who knows, maybe he looks to still re-sign Brock Nelson come the end of the season. But if under the circumstance the Islanders are looking to move him, the Blackhawks are a great option to scoop him up and then extend him. Another big thing for the Blackhawks is they can absorb his entire contract. Most teams that are going to be in the running for a guy like Brock Nelson are going to need him to be retained at 50%. But the Blackhawks, they have a lot of cap space. They can absorb the $6 million. I think if you're the Islanders, a 2025 first-round pick from Toronto, a 2026 third-round pick, and forward Paul Ludwinski, who is a solid bottom six center. That's his potential ceiling. I think that would get the deal done. I don't think he's going to be traded for an absolute exorbitant price. And again, too, the fact that the Blackhawks can absorb his entire salary means that the Islanders wouldn't get as big of a package from the Blackhawks as they would from another team potentially. So again, I think this would be a great addition right beside Connor Bedard. And then you also have the veteran experience, which they've tried gaining over the past couple seasons. And worst case scenario, if he falls off a little bit, they extend him, he can fit into that third line center role a lot as well. And then you slot Jason Dickinson down into a checking role on the fourth line. So I think the team really balances out. Even if he's 33 and 34 years old next year, I think he would be a great fit if he was acquired by the Blackhawks and then extended for another 2 years. So Brock Nelson I really like, as well as he's the most well-rounded player out of the 4 that I'll be discussing today, and I think it would be a great option if the Islanders are looking to shop him this season. The last player that I'm discussing is arguably my favorite option out of the bunch, and that's Dylan Cozens of the Buffalo Sabres. Dylan Cozens is an interesting player because he started off his career really well with the Buffalo Sabres. Last year had a down year, similar to guys like Tage Thompson, the rest of the Buffalo Sabres forward core, and just team in general. They were supposed to be a playoff team, and a lot of their players regressed more than they progressed, and that led to the Sabres missing the playoffs. Down year for everyone, so wasn't the best year. And to start the year, Dylan Cousins has 5 points in 14 games as of recording this video, so he hasn't gotten off to a great start this year either for the Sabres. And with $7.1 million for the next 5 years, the Sabres might look to try to cut bait and get rid of that contract, especially when they have a lot of young guys like Levi, Paterka, and a bunch of other players. Bowen Byram comes to mind as well, that they're going to need to extend. And they also have the luxury of so many young forwards and in their prospect pool where those guys are going to need top 6, top 9 forward roles in the future. So they might see Dylan Cousins as he's getting a little too overpaid, he's an expendable player, and that's where the Blackhawks could come in as they can absorb his entire contract. And again, he'd be a great fit at second line center. The big thing that separates him versus guys like Zegras and Nashis, who I talked about previously, was the fact that he is a true center. His faceoff percentage isn't the best. It's still below 50%, but it's around 46.5, 47%, which again is still much better than Nashis and Zegras. And there's no reason to think that he can't improve on that. Faceoffs are something that you'd expect players to get better at over time, and the fact that he's already at a 47% career faceoff percentage at 24 years old is certainly a positive sign. Plays solid defensively, nothing to rave about, but is somewhat of a solid defensive player. And again, although he's been lackluster last year and to start this year, he's shown that he can produce offensively with seasons over 60 points. I think this would be a great addition for the Blackhawks. I think this is your set it and forget it second line center in the future. Then you can move Nazar and Oliver Moore out to wing, and you have more flexibility with your roster as a whole. I think he'd be great between Hall and Bertuzzi. You could throw Teravainen with him as well. There's the passer, Cousins the finisher. So I think Dylan Cousins is arguably the best option for the Blackhawks right now. And if the Sabres are looking to move him, I think the Blackhawks should be one of the top teams in on him. I think because he hasn't shown too many flashes the past year and a half, the Sabres might sell a little lower on him. And that's where I think the Toronto 2025 first round pick, a 2026 second round pick, and then potentially Nolan Allen, who's a young forward, shutdown D-man, and is more of a bottom pair. That's his ceiling, but that would really shore up the Buffalo Sabres decor. I think those three pieces should be more than enough to acquire a guy like Dylan Cousins, especially if you feel confident in the fact that he's more the 60-point player that you saw a couple years ago than the player who has 5 points in 14 games and had the down year last year. So I think it's definitely worth taking a shot on him, especially with the fact that the Blackhawks have so many draft picks and so many prospects where if they want to take a shot on a guy like Dylan Cousins, I think that would be a solid move. $7.1 million again for the next 5 years. You have him under contract throughout his young prime. Again, I think it's worth at least considering. So overall, that's probably the best option that I can come up with at the moment. But if you have any other options as a viewer, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Let me know about all these options. I know Hurricanes fans are going to talk about how Nashis isn't going to get moved. That's completely understandable. Again, 21 points in 12 games start this season. I know Ducks fans are going to expect more for Zegras, but if you're a fan of any of the teams that I've pitch these trades to, let me know as well. Do you think these trades are too much, too low? Obviously, I know that you guys are going to know your players a lot better than I do. So if you guys have other thoughts and opinions, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. And that'll do it for this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast, a little shorter edition and talking just about Blackhawks 2C options. But if you found this interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel as well. And I'll talk to you guys again soon. See ya.